Member Sturman?
Here.
Member Holthouse?
Here.
Member Tripp? Member Rambo?
He's
You
muted.
gotta unmute.
Sorry, I dropped my mouse.
I gotcha. Member Archesky?
Here.
Member Galtney has also resigned, so we're too short. Councilmember Greg Nani? Councilmember Edens?
Here.
Councilmember Remy?
Here.
Councilmember Farmer? Councilmember McCutcheon?
Here.
Councilmember Bope? Councilmember McCune? Councilmember Garitano?
Here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Archesky, do you have any opening remarks? If not, then I'll just say a couple words. We're happy to have Dr. Hammer with us tonight. I think we're at the point where we are, and I think it was very helpful to have Mr. Vunich and Ms. Arnett give some good insight prior to this meeting to myself and some members of the committee, that we're kind of at the beginning of a crossroads where hopefully we're going to be making some changes for how the committee may go forward with some items, and Dr. Hammer and Mark Meyer are going to be certainly helpful in that. So we'll hear a little bit more about that in a bit. But without further ado, let's move. Now we have a quorum for approval of the minutes. Do I have anybody want to make a motion to approve the previous meeting's minutes? Okay, so we've got put forth by Mr. Gunther, seconded by Ms. Edens. All in favor of the meetings, please say aye.
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 All opposed? And anyone abstaining? Okay, so all members have approved the minutes. Moving into our next aspect is going to be public comment. Do we have any public comment cards for tonight?
We do not, and there's no one on the Zoom call from the public.
Okay, great. So next up, we have update on creek data collection fieldwork. If Ms. Arnett and Mr. Vunich wouldn't mind presenting that.
Mr. Co-Chair, I'm going to let Kathy kind of take it from here.
I think I'm going to modify probably pretty greatly from the memo based on some conversations that we've had internally among staff and with the co-chairs or with Councilmember Remy as well. So we've so far on the data collection, we have basically completed 2 creeks, Fox Creek and Cox Creek, but that's just the main channels for those 2. So we kind of looked at other priority areas, and there's 4 watersheds of our 9 that have pretty low priority needs. We don't get many complaints in them. We don't have much of the main channel. Most of those watersheds are within other communities, and that's August Tavern, Flat, Forby, and Kiefer Creek. So at this point, we are kind of saying we probably don't need to worry about doing data collection in those. Let's focus our efforts on where we know we have issues, and we have plenty of issues in the places that we have already mapped and have been reviewing. So that leaves our 3 remaining watersheds with high priorities as Bonham, Hamilton Carr, and Wild Horse that probably need attention in addition to Fox and Cox Creek. So what we've discussed a couple of different things, and one in the memo is, continuing an overall data collection, a data analysis of all of those watersheds and trying to baseline and then work from there to find issues and funding and solutions. So based on our conversations, it's a lot of work, and it's also a lot of data, and we want to make sure that whatever data we're getting is going to be useful and manageable. So in conversations in the last 24 hours, essentially, what I think the direction that we would like to go and what I would like to outline for you all, and then have you discuss and provide some feedback. So essentially, our opinion is that the task force their process probably should be 2 phases. We're in phase 1 right now. We've made great strides in phase 1 with the data collection and all of our subcommittees and the work that we've gotten done to date. So we've broken down, but we've also been meeting a year. In the last week, we've had 2 task force members resign. we want to make sure people are staying interested and that we're getting on task and getting things completed so we can get to the point of solutions and fixes and education to help people out as best we can. So we've basically created 5 steps to complete phase 1 that we'd like to outline for you all and get your opinion and feedback and see what you think. So the first step would be to take the 17 critical locations that Dr. Hammer has identified, and that's a report that was in the packet, and he can discuss those a little bit later, but those are major issues. So we'll take those 17 critical locations or locations of concern. And then if we couple those with, we have 73 reports from residents. So those are across multiple watersheds. There's some in areas we haven't identified yet, such as Hamilton Carr, Bonham, and Wild Horse. But our opinion and we're making a little bit of a hypothesis here, but that those are probably some of our worst locations in other watersheds that we maybe don't have the data on yet. But if we combine those 2 sets of data points, we have 90 locations. That's a lot. And we have no funding, as you all are aware. So the thought was if we take those 90 locations and provide them to Dr. Hammer and Mark Meyer, our 2 consultants, and have them start evaluating them, maybe start telling us recommendations, what are fixes in some of these areas, and what are those fixes going to cost. We can also take that list, we can send it to MSD. We can make sure MSD gets it on their critical location list and the ones that are in their jurisdiction, but they can start potentially looking for funding for us and put our projects on the list. So when they go for a vote, there's not only 2 projects in the city of Wildwood. We can also then use those locations for our own internal budgeting purposes as we move into fiscal year 2021 for the city, but also as fundable and fixable projects if we go for a stormwater and park sales tax. So that's a huge undertaking right there and will take some time, but we feel like we maybe already have plenty of data to get that process started. The second step would be to pursue funding, as Mr. Sherman has done a phenomenal job in finding that there really isn't any. So we're down to very few choices, but one of those choices is a stormwater and park sales tax. So some of the things that the committee could be working on is how much do we want to pursue? We can do up to 1% on a sales tax. And I think some of the things that we need to educate the public on are, we do have one of the lowest tax rates in St. Louis County in a sales tax perspective. But we also, the state law allows, and we would seek, it's for stormwater and it's for parks. So we would need to outline so that we can, when we do go to the voters and try and ask for this tax, we need to identify some potential. It doesn't need to necessarily be specific projects, but there are people that are very visual and will want to know specific projects. But there are things that could be done on a grander scale if we had some funding. And then we got to work on the wording for the ballot. That has to be to the County Board of Elections this fall. So there's not a ton of time, even though next April seems like an eternity away. That time is going to go by very quickly for us. So that's step 2 that we could really be making some headway on. Step 3 is our ordinance review, and Dr. Hammer has already begun that process. And so we'll get to that. He was working on the critical locations first, and so he's just getting started. So we're not going to put the pressure on him tonight to necessarily put him in the hot seat out here, but that is something that we still need to pursue and we can keep working on. The 4th is to continue with the video series. The video series, I think, is going to be critical for public education, just critical for helping people who live near and on creeks to know what they're doing and how to maintain that. It's also probably going to be key if we do go for a sales tax on the ballot. So we could be pursuing and working on that video series as well. And then the 5th and final step that we think would kind of wrap up phase 1 would be starting in a couple months when we look at the city's budget. So fiscal year 2021, and this committee can make recommendations. What do we think is the best approach? How much money do we want to budget? Is this something that we want to project annually, potentially? Is it for engineering? Is it to do some hard fixes? Is it a retainer for consulting fees? I think those are all different things that the committee can evaluate and discuss and get us ready for that budget discussion, which is going to be a crazy discussion after COVID. So I think that there's, but we can get in for kind of our piece of the pie. So those 5 items would be our proposed steps to kind of complete phase 1. Phase 2 would be the remaining 7 watersheds, maybe collecting more data, maybe not the comprehensive approach that we've taken so far, but maybe a more critical approach and identification. Dr. Hammer has offered to potentially do the 3 priority watersheds when he's completed with the ordinance review. So we were laughing before. Dr. Hammer's no longer retired. He's retired from the University of Missouri Columbia. He is working a lot for the city of Wildwood. So that may be a better approach to really have the eyes and the training in those watersheds to figure out where, those critical points. And then the last thing we had discussed, Boy Scout assistance, and, staff internally, we kind of discussed, and Ms. Edens and Mr. Remy, we had the same conversation that they may be our key to creek cleanup. The city can provide dumpsters in key locations. We can have Gailey Contracting come pick up. We used him for Stream Team down in the Merrimack, and he'll remove the larger items if there are tires, and you never know what you find in the creek that they'll pull out. So we're thinking maybe if we have an enthusiastic group, they don't have camps this summer, and maybe when the weather's a little bit better or something, that we can get them out and maybe do a comprehensive cleanup in our creeks. So Mr. Vunich, pipe in, Ms. Dr. Remy, Ms. Edens, did I miss anything? And then we'd love to discuss and have your feedback.
I have a question when you get to the point of accepting questions.
I have a couple of comments, if it's okay, Dr. Remy.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry. Let me just give me 1 second. I'll go to Ms. McCutcheon and then Ms. Edens. But just to clarify, so phase 1, critical identified areas already by Dr. Hammer on the 73 locations. This is going to go to Mr. Meyer and to Dr. Hammer. They're going to put their heads together to figure out exactly what the priority steps would be, how that may affect and influence some of the other areas of the stream, and then come up potentially with where they think budgetary needs might be and how much this might cost. 2 is to pursue funding, could be in the form of stormwater sales tax. 3 is ongoing ordinance review. 4 is the video educational series. 5 is the city budgetary recommendations for the incoming upcoming budget for fiscal year 21. So totally reasonable. Okay, so sorry, now Ms. McCutcheon.
Yeah, so we haven't had our citizen representative and we haven't done any mapping in Ward 5. So I have two questions. 1, Dr. Hammer, have you walked any part of Ward 5? And then 2, since you've already identified 17 critical locations and you're talking about not going forward, can we still, if I can find someone to do this, can we still get our data in?
Much of the 73, which will be matched with the 17 critical locations, many of those are in Ward 5.
So somebody's actually walked Ward 5?
Parts of Cox Creek, yes, Dr. Hammer has walked portions, but we also have the resident reports from a lot of Ward 5.
Okay.
In that stretch of Cox Creek. So it would
I've
be
actually walked all of Cox Creek.
Twice, right?
You're just a
From
show off,
the
Dr. Hammer.
down to Kerrs Mill Road.
Thank you for that.
You're
Miss-
welcome.
Ms. Edens?
Yes. So one thing before we leave today is those 17 critical areas, and that was a really great 84-page document. I don't know if anybody else had this trouble as a sidebar, but the very last page there were no pictures that loaded for me. I could see squares, but nothing.
That is correct.
Okay, might want to edit that. I think what we need guidance on is setting up a maintenance plan for the critical areas. So, I noticed in some of your notes that we need to be constantly revisiting certain segments. So that is one approach that I would like to establish today. Whether you think it's after, you know, every major storm event, somebody in the Highlands needs to walk out, and at these, if it's every 2 months, and I can, you know, send a call out to other citizens for that. Then, you know, I'm still fine with the segments as presented, getting elf. And then, you know, regarding the comments about, you know, priorities, I think voters and myself respond to infrastructure that affects them. So, you know, it resonated really quickly that there were 3 bridges mentioned in my ward alone. And I think that establishing a estimated cost for repair and maintenance in the future would not only be prudent now for saving, but also for advocating for a ballot measure. So I would really encourage those as a priority for our and second is, you know, the city-owned property. So estimate, you know, before, you know, priority for some of the data points that are citizen-owned and on private property to help, you know, refer them to sources. So that's my 2 cents. So I just want to make sure I understand, are we still asking for volunteers for those segments in the attachment?
Dr. Hammer, I think the key question in relationship also to Ms. Eden's question for you would be, what would be the time frame that you and Mr. Meyer would need to take a look at what already has been identified by yourself and the citizens to be able to understand where you may need more data points so that Ms. Edens can get folks to go in those areas and get those areas identified so that we can get a comprehensive budgetary oversight plan going into the fall?
That was a question for me about how soon we can do this.
Yeah, and how much time do you anticipate would it take for the 2 of you guys to get together to do that?
Well, I can't speak for his schedule. I'm pretty wide open. The primary question in terms of time is where are they? How far apart are they? Because if they're fairly remote and I'm going to have to be driving around, it'll take a little bit longer. But if they're all basically fairly close together, I could do that in probably less than a week. One other thing I'd like to interject real quickly, you keep talking about the 73 locations that citizens have identified and the 17, what I call locations of concern. Don't forget you've got 4 places that we call priority. And I didn't submit a report on those because you had a field trip out there, but those would be the Elegant Child Cut Bank, the first 2 cut banks downstream from those in the same stretch, and then the cut bank over by Highlands of Wild Horse that is all in fine silty material that is going to be moving towards Clayton Road at some point because that point bar there is huge and it's forcing the creek right up against that highly erodible bank. So you've got those 4 things, which are, in my estimation, the highest on your list.
Can you develop an estimate for what the budgetary needs would be to address those right away? And we can do this in pieces just in case so we can move forward to try to figure out for infrastructure if we need to put in with MSD, MoDOT, et cetera, to get these things addressed.
I think the question that you as a task force should first address is do you want to buy some time while we put together the estimates of what it would cost to do a repair that would last for a while? And the buying the time would be getting into the creek and starting to tear apart these point bars and moving a lot of that gravel up against those cut banks that are eroding every single time you have a flow event in the creek. And that is something I think you really should carefully consider. I think it'll buy time, particularly if you get somebody out there with a front end loader that knows what he's doing and can pile that rock up exactly where it needs to be. And I can be there when they're getting ready to do that, to show them where that needs to be done. But I think that's something that should be first on your list.
You could create a phased approach for us to do this as such, correct? You could actually recommend us to do that as phase 1, step 1 now, and then develop our comprehensive plan from that point forward.
Yes, I think that would be the way to go. But I didn't want to do that until we talked again and you had seen that list of 17 locations of concern that are all in Cox Creek.
Ms. Oldhouse?
I've
Pardon
been walking the creek, and a piece that I think is missing from the phases I heard was any kind of preventive measures. I mean, we're kind of chasing these problem areas, but as I've looked at, Cox Creek, which is, in tough shape, there isn't a single place where it's looked healthy really that I've walked yet. And then after a recent huge storm event, I went down and looked at one of the retention ponds, and you could see from, the debris scatter that it had been, I don't know, maybe 10% full, 5% full. So, I wonder in parallel with trying to sort of fix the problem, whether we're doing anything or if there's anything that can be done to sort of, somewhere between the long-term, change the ordinances and the fixing it. Is there, any place where we can say, hey, if we could make these retention ponds do what they're supposed to do, that would keep us from, chasing a moving target. And maybe Dr. Hammer, you're the best person to speak to that.
One of the things that would help would be, and we've mentioned this before, I think I mentioned it when I first spoke to your task force, and I know Joe and I were talking about it 20 years ago, would be to have somebody with a GIS system, whether it's a city or you hire somebody else, to try to identify the locations of all the detention basins in the Cox Creek watershed, and then go out and inspect them to make sure that they're still there, because these detention basins automatically revert to the responsibility of the subdivision when the last house in the subdivision is sold. And then the second thing to do once they've been identified would be to try to use the GIS, or to use the GIS to determine the volume of water that these things would hold. And that would tell you whether it'll make any difference whether you do anything with these or not.
I think we discussed that. This is Rick. I think Terry was going to try to pinpoint those on the GIS system.
That'd be a good thing to do. And then I did see several detention basins when I was walking Cox Creek that could be expanded. They're in locations where nobody's going to be needing that land, I don't think, and they could be deepened. So you could increase the volume of storage in a lot of these detention basins. And the other thing that would need to be done on some of them is alter the outlets. A lot of the flow outlets are right at the bottom of the detention basin, so they don't even serve to hold water back. That would be relatively inexpensive because you've already got exits from all these things. You just have to construct something at the exit to raise the exit point up nearer the top of the detention basin. But that would be the next first step to take.
And let me just clarify, when I was talking 10%, I was talking like 10% maybe of the bottom, like it was an infinitesimal amount of the volume that the retention pond would hold. I mean, it's just sitting there. It's a great grazing ground for deer right now. I don't think it does anything to, really slow, collect water and slow the energy that ends up in the creek.
Well, a lot of them were just whatever comes in goes out.
And like I said, this was a significant storm event that had happened over the weekend, and you could see that the pond had done very little to.
The template you have for the detention basins is the one that Joe and I worked on back in the early 2000. What's that subdivision again, Joe?
Dartmouth.
Yeah. That one's very, very functional and very effective.
You did Windcrest too.
Yes.
Mr.
Did you have to
Remmel?
look at the villages of Brightleaf? Detention, retention, because I don't think they're functioning properly.
And Ms. McCutcheon, we'll investigate that before we release any of the escrow funds we hold. And certainly the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District will do a final inspection as well, because they have a cash escrow where ours is a letter of credit.
Thank you.
Mr. Remmel? Rob, we can't hear you very well. I don't know if you can speak louder.
Okay, let's see. Is it any better now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. My hearing aid's now been turned down.
Okay. Sorry about that. Is everybody okay? I agree with Carol.
Nope. Louder.
Can you hear me?
Nope. You're gonna have to sit closer to the mic.
How's this?
No.
Oh man, it's been fine.
Put your foil hat on. See if that helps.
Well, okay.
Just talk louder. We can hear you when you spoke louder.
Okay. I'll do my best. So I agree with Carol. We're the erosion task force, not the flooding task force, but the complaints that I've had are folks whose homes have flooded and so forth. There's a low density area, and we seem to be focused on Fox Creek, at least for now, which is a high density area, because people are losing backyards as opposed to folks, having their basements flooded and whatnot. We have to address those concerns. One way I think we may be able to start doing that, or seeming as though we're doing that, is having some good solid mitigation instruction and education for folks. There are people right now in Ward 6 that I spoke to when I was walking the creek that were dying to do some work, and they're going to do some work this summer, and they're going to throw up a berm. But are they going to throw it up in the right place? Well, I think no, just based on what I've learned during the course of this task force process. And I think they could do a better job if they had some consulting help. I mentioned that last time. I think it would be a pretty cost-effective way to do things. And there's even the particular area in Fox Creek in question is 200 feet wide. It's nothing but loose gravel and 10 feet of bank that's cut for several hundred feet. I mean, it's bad. But if we could do what Dr. Hammer said and get in there with a couple of track loaders and pile up the gravel for a while, at least it's something that we've done that's a positive step that may help it carry more water without flooding people's basements. Because I'm afraid we're going to get off on the tangent of fixing erosion problems without worrying about the people whose homes are flooding. And if that's our decision jointly, we all need a way to tell people that that's what we're going to do. Did that make any sense to anyone?
Yep, makes total sense completely. Do you think, Dr. Hammer, then, understanding that, and we'll go to Mr. Vunich next, that in the process in the next couple of weeks with you and Mark going through the identified locations, that you could also identify and attribute a potential cost for dealing with having these consultants and or some of these preventative measures, at least for the short term, so that we could at least perhaps see if we can allocate funds at some point in the near future for it?
That's a reasonable request. I think we can do that.
Okay, Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Dr. Remy. In response to Dr. Rambo's comments, I believe Fox Creek, Cox Creek, and several other of the mainline channels in the watershed are so impaired that flooding is the only outcome we can expect. And I think the key component that's impairing the mainline channels of these certain watersheds is the bed load that Dr. Hammer's identified. Just in the time that Dr. Hammer and I have been in the area of the highlands at Wild Horse, we've seen the bed load increase in certain locations substantially. And there's photographic evidence that Dr. Hammer's provided. So what I would hope is that if we can address that short-term goal that Dr. Hammer's enunciated, which is to get into the creeks, move some of that bed load around, armor the sides, restore the natural flow line if we can for a temporary basis, I think some of that flooding will abate itself. Not all, because as we found out in August of 2019, when you get seven or 8 inches of rain in a 6-hour span, there's not much anybody can do other than just hang on and wait it out. So, Dr. Rambo, I think we won't ignore flooding. And I think if we address the cause or a part of the cause, I think we'll see an improvement. And I would defer to Dr. Hammer and Rick Archesky, our experts, to either say that's wrong or right.
There are folks who are willing to do such things as rain gardens and just small scale, small bore activities that might really help at the headwaters. And I myself am one. I'll do whatever retention basins, as long as they're aesthetically pleasing, that I have to do. I'm a qualified operator and I got nothing but time. I can throw up a dam with the best of them. I just don't want to ready, fire, aim. And there are other folks out there just like me in the same boat. And mitigation seems like it would be a great step for the watersheds that are not in such bad shape, especially if it's we can do some really cheap things with just by helping people and telling them what they should be doing on their own coin.
Dr. Rambo, just to let you know, your time is, you have less time starting on Monday evening, just to let you know. I don't know if you remembered that you are a new council member for Ward 6, but anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But one question I had then is in response to the creation of these, and Rick or Dr. Hammer, are there key locations that you think could be addressed sooner than later? And any idea, and I'm not holding you to this, what something like that might look like from a financial expenditure?
You really should talk to Mark about finances, because I'm an academic. I've never done that kind of work, but I can provide the information as to which ones you should address first. And back to the flooding, Rob, I think one of the things that needs to be done is we should isolate or separate the complaints that deal directly with flooding, and those places need to be examined so that we can determine what's the source of the flooding. Joe and I have visited a couple places in the Fox Creek watershed where I don't think there's anything they can do, quite frankly. And the flooding that you saw last August, as Joe's already mentioned, and I'm going to say it in a slightly different way, that was a really perfect storm, because there was a lot of water already in the soils before you had that 7 to 8 inch rainfall overnight. I've seen 2 of those events at other times in my 35 years in Missouri. One was down in the Ozarks and in the forested landscape, and you wouldn't have believed what it did there. It was an 8 inch rain that came between midnight and 5 a.m. Back in 1997. And there was another one up in northeast Missouri that was the same kind of thing. In all those situations, the ground was already saturated when you had a flood like that. So some of these places in the landscape that were flooded back in August of 19 probably will never flood again in the lifetimes of the people that live there unless we have another event like that. One of the things I've talked to Joe about doing is getting precipitation data for the last 20 years and going through it one storm at a time, which wouldn't take nearly as much time as it sounds like it would, and seeing what has been the local experience with those high intensity storms that we thought were going to happen when we started to see climate change in the Midwest. I think that's a question that should be answered before we get really involved in trying to prevent flooding, which may not occur again. There's probably some places that are going to flood periodically or at regular intervals, and those are the ones we should focus on.
So if folks are rolling, I won't occupy this too much more time, but if folks are rolling tractors this summer, throwing up dirt berms and so on and so forth, we are already behind the curve. And the folks, one set of folks that I think we're talking about, Gwen and Julie, beautiful home, got flooded out. They're mortified. They're afraid now, and they're going to do something. And it would be nice to be able to, send somebody over there to tell them what to do.
Well, I've been there with Joe. We were there a couple of weeks ago, and they're in a place in the watershed where there's not a lot they could do. If they berm, they're going to have to have a berm that's 150 feet long. We're thinking about what we might do there to help them out, but I think they are a classic example of somebody who was just in the wrong place when this particular storm hit. It's the first time they've ever been flooded. They've never seen anything remotely like that. So I think I could start examining these individual locations that people have complained about floods. I could start doing that next week. we could get that done pretty quickly. And I really think that should be done before people start spending money and moving material around.
I agree 100%. I just think it's really a show of city support to send somebody over there and have a conversation with them. Here's what we think you can do. We can't do it for 150 homes along Fox Creek, but if you are interested in doing some excavation work, this is probably your best bet. That's all they're looking for.
I understand that. I think it's a good point, a good idea. They at least need some response. So like I said, I'm willing to start doing that next week if that's what you want me to do.
Well, it's not up to me, but I had
the committee.
I had one other point about taxes. I looked into all the surrounding municipalities, and they have up to 3% greater sales tax rate than we do. And someone mentioned 1%. Could you explain to me why we can only go for 1%? Is that because that politics being the art of the possible? Or is there some other reason why we can only go for 1 cent?
Let me tackle that one. The state statute only allows 1%
One at a time?
maximum on that tax.
Wait,
So,
what would that look like financially if we were to go full 1% for a tax like that? What kind of revenue, obviously split between parks and this, what would that look like for the city?
Dr. Remy, when we proposed the stormwater and park sales tax in 2008, we did it at a quarter cent level. And the message from our city administrator at that time is that would generate about $700,000 per year.
Okay, so we would potentially, if we went to a full 1%, presently would generate about $2.8 million annually.
And Dr. Rambo, you're exactly right. When you shop in other cities all around us, you're funding their stormwater and parks, because nearly every neighboring city has already passed that tax years and years ago. So you're paying in Chesterfield, Eureka, Baldwin, Manchester, Ellisville, you're paying for their parks and stormwater.
Yeah, and I did the calculations, and it's negligible for, if they spend $2,000 a year in Wildwood, it was like $10 total for the year or something like that. It's ridiculously low. And if you put it to folks that way, I think they'd be willing to do it.
Well, and not to mention, though, if you think about a 10-year plan and even say you had a 60-40 split in deference for the flood and for the 10-year plan, you're looking at about $16 to $17 million of actually revenue specifically for this item. That's pretty significant, because I think we thought the amount of money that would be required would be a little bit north of $20 million, I think, if that's correct.
And speaking of retainer, I think John's going to have something at the end. It would be nice if we had the Dr. Hammer and Mark Meyer review some of our bridge buildings. But John's going to show something later.
Yeah, I haven't asked permission yet, Rick, but I do have I have put together some slide images for you guys to give some input, and let me know what you think. Okay.
Well, with the permission of Dr. Remy and Mr. Archesky, it's the intent of the Department of Planning at mid-year, which is just the beginning of August now, to put forth a request for additional consulting funding, so as we can do have people on retainer. I wouldn't want to try it outside the budget process because of our concerns relating to COVID-19, but I think at mid-year it would be an opportune time to present to the City Council a request for additional funding, and then we could do what Dr. Rambo has suggested. We can do what Mr. Archesky just referenced, and we'd be in a position to help our residents through the remainder of 2020.
I think that's a great idea. Perhaps Mr. Archesky, myself, yourself, and Kathy can work on how to prepare that. Because if Kathy and I were speaking earlier, the July 28th meeting that's been scheduled, for everyone's knowledge, falls upon the week that that we said we were not going to have any city meetings. So therefore, at the present time, there won't be a July meeting. So the four of us perhaps can work and develop that for the August meeting. I think that's a brilliant idea.
I'd love to have the input and assistance, so thank you.
So just moving along with our agenda for next up, I believe we were going to discuss the webinar series.
Wait, Ken, do you mind? We never established if we were definitely doing the volunteers for the segments as presented in the agenda attachment. So I just want to make sure that that's squared away for the subcommittee. Are we still doing that?
Dr. Hammer, would it be possible in the upcoming just week, could you and Mr. Meyer just review the 4 locations you've already identified as high priority, 17 additional locations, and then 73? And if nothing more, just to say, when you plot them on the map, if there are additional areas we need to get volunteers out, because we're not going to have a July meeting, we could at least get some volunteers to address those areas going forward.
Well, what I'm talking about is the area that we have no data on that's highlighted. So
right, but yeah, I think the point that Ms. Arnett was saying was that we may not have data on it, but it may not be helpful at this point. We may have enough data that we can use so that they could address a comprehensive plan just based off of that.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so the other thing that I would ask any council member and future council member to go ahead and do is Terry can still work on the GIS for the detention retention basins, and that's great. But if we want to know if it's still active, I would ask, current council members to go through the public list and the copy that we were given on subdivision trustees. Send each group of trustee an email, request the GPS, a photo, and a description of any retention basin that they're aware of. And we can either send those emails, now there'd be a lot of emails, or if it doesn't take a lot of effort, we could create an entry form like what we've been doing for the creek that just says, GPS of the retention basin, comments, and picture. And the name of the subdivision would be helpful too. So I just want to ask staff, is it easier to create a form or is it easier for us to send you emails? I just don't want to bombard you, with 20 emails times 8.
I would defer to Miss Arnett. Farm creation is not my specialty, but I think we could easily do it.
Okay, do you need a motion to create the form, or can we?
And again, I spoke for Miss Arnett. We could create a farm.
Yeah, the form creation is very simple. I think it would take just a few minutes to create the form, and then we can gather that data as it comes in. It's, there's still organization on the end. So whether because it doesn't all come down as nice and pretty as it looks when the form itself, the photos come separate, the data comes in a spreadsheet, and we have to go. So that's why we developed a system for the current data collection where we're, renaming and rematching pictures with the form data. So either way, I think is fine. The form may be better because then we do at least have all the data in one focused area. We don't also risk that our spam filter may, block somebody's stuff coming in. So I think that would be, and we have much of it from subdivision plats and aerial photos that we could do as well. So, but creating a form is no problem.
Great. As soon as you guys send that to me, then if you don't need a motion, then I will disperse it to not only the subcommittee, but the task force as a whole. So we can just kind of start to get that coming in.
I think
did I misspeak? And Miss Arnett, did I misspeak? Or that's exactly what we were talking about as far as the walking of the creeks, that we might have enough data right now to at least get to develop the first plans as needed. And then the other consideration for Councilmember Edens would be, if we do have volunteers, I think Ms. Holthouse's and Dr. Rambaugh's concerns about some of the retention basins and or flood spots, there may not be any reason why we couldn't utilize the same volunteers if they're available and want to look at those areas. We could probably still do that in parallel, and while Dr. Hammer and Mr. Meyer are working on the next steps for phase 1, perhaps.
My advice would be to go through the trustees. Actually, my retention pond is right behind that tree line. So it's accessed through private property and easement. So not always walkable from the creek bed. So you'd have to drive into each neighborhood and then know where it is, because a lot of times it's behind houses. So if you don't know where to drive to get to it. So I would still go through the trustees.
That's a great
Well,
idea.
I don't think our trustee list is totally up to date. I know it certainly isn't for Ward 5.
It's not. We depend on the homeowners association to contact the city and let us know of changes. And sometimes that doesn't happen on a regular basis. But as council representatives, and we have one from each of the 8 wards, hopefully you have a better resource base than we do.
Our list may not be perfect, but it's probably a great place to start. We had more than 500 trustees that when we mailed out the brochure that you all created, I can't even remember how many months ago that was, but that did help actually update our list, because a lot of people got that brochure and they were quick to call and say, I am no longer a trustee. So, and they would give us some updated information. So the list is a little bit better. It's not perfect. It's not all inclusive by any stretch of the imagination, but it probably is 500 plus individuals. So that would be a pretty good start.
And not to get into any depth on this, but a lot of these older detention ponds have been silted in. And it's up to the subdivision to clean them out. So they're not holding what they're supposed to be holding in right now.
So that's a good segue, Rick, do you think, maybe into webinar series and perhaps a short webinar where we can discuss specifically how the subdivisions can clean out these basins, perhaps?
Most of them don't have money to do it.
Got it. Kathy, do you want to touch base on the webinar education series, or is that Ms. Holt?
That was me raising my hand. And I apologize to my members of the Education Committee who I haven't polled before making this recommendation. One of the things I've seen that I think would be timely, given the season we're in, would be focusing on dumping in the creek. And then maybe a theme of, you shouldn't be doing this. Here's some ideas for composting. Here's the ways you can responsibly deal with that yard waste and brush. So
I agree. And the timing is essential. And I think that the first video that we wanted to accomplish is the do's and don'ts. And so I think that ties right in with what you're saying, Ms. Holthouse, where it's don't dump your yard waste, don't dump your yard clippings, all those types of things on treatment of the creek. And also to help in areas that Dr. Rambo had referenced before, where people are spending money and either not fixing the problem or potentially doing damage when they think they're helping out, gabion baskets, putting rock in the creek when they don't know any better. So that is for sure, I think, the first video that we should tackle.
Okay. And I think when we try to get out there with the here's the don't, if we can have that mindset of we need to give people the right way of dealing with it. You don't say, well, don't do this and don't do that and, leave them hanging, but say, hey, if you've got this yard waste, here's what you can do with it. And if you've got this issue, here's the process you should use.
Great point.
Have we developed a list of what we're hoping to do for the webinar or educational series of the major topics?
Yes, sir. We have that list and it actually keeps growing. We get additional ideas submitted from others on the committee, on the task force, as well as internal. But as Kathy mentioned, we are recommending to proceed forward with a couple of the videos. The first, as prioritized by Kathy, and I think supported by Ms. Holthouse, is to do that do and don'ts. And the do's should contain recommendations or solutions, or at least options.
You need a motion for budgetary release for that?
Not necessarily. As I mentioned, I think probably a couple of meetings ago, it might even been before COVID-19 stopped our process, I put aside and kind of armored some money for this particular task force in the budget, and that was retained by the city administrator. So I think we're in good shape. I just would like to have the endorsement to proceed forward and and get the process in motion, so to speak.
Ms. Holthouse, do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I move that we proceed with the video series, starting with the do's and don'ts.
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Ms. McCutcheon. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, there's your
the master
motion.
list of those
Thank you.
the suggested videos. Where is the master list of those suggested videos right now?
There's a memo in this packet that had seven videos listed. So the
You
first
click
two,
on your update of video at webinar.
So do you have one on, do you have it on SharePoint or anything like that?
no, it was on the web, the link that I sent. Hang on, and I can.
Okay, so that's the latest one. Okay.
Yes, the memorandum's dated June 17th, so that's the latest.
Can you guys see that?
Thanks, Ms. McCutcheon. Yes.
You're
Yep,
welcome.
I got it.
And Joe and Kathy, have we pursued like going to the community college for one of their students doing some of this video?
Actually, we contacted a former Historic Preservation Commission member that does this for a living, Greg Barth, and he's willing to help us out. And he has always treated the city very fairly in terms of his time and cost. And he had a gentleman that's a radio personality that's willing to do the voiceover for us. So we've got a lot of the components in place, and we think it's a reasonable price to provide a professionally looking video that actually has a lot of good information. The area we're lagging a bit on is the text for the video itself, and that's something that we were hoping that Dr. Hammer, maybe you, Mr. Archeski, and others could provide and assist us with.
That was the better scenario than my face and Dr. Hammer's voice. So the other route.
The thing I'm not
Was
sensitive.
Was Mr. Barth the one that came to us at Calks Creek when we were there for that field trip?
Yeah, so he already has some video footage, and he's exceedingly easy to work with as well. And so when I talked with him, he'll work with Dr. Hammer to make sure that we have the correct photos and video that show those really important locations when we start talking about fixes or what to do, what not to do. I think Dr. Hammer probably could get him exactly where he needs to be. So we thought that would be from the an easy collaboration and a professional approach to the videos.
What's the turnaround time you think for creation and completion so they can go out to the public?
If Joe and I got out of the way, it would probably be much faster. Once we were just concerned about the cost, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was supported. So we'll get going. I don't know, to tell you the truth, and I think that once we get the first one will take the longest, I think, and then from there we can probably move at a quick clip.
Mr. Rambo?
Talking to me?
Talking to you.
Okay. Is there a way to collaborate? Just send in one sentence suggestions as to useful content. Is there a forum you'd like us to use, or is it just send you an email? Or that's what I was kind of hoping to get to with SharePoint, but I don't think we're there yet. So you tell me, because I have some suggestions that I think might be useful.
Dr. Rambo, Kathy and I utilize SharePoint, so if you like to use that as your tool to communicate, great. If not, and you want to share with the other committee members what you're submitting, an email is fine to Kathy and I, or either. But we would hope you would provide comments, suggestions, collaboration, particularly those that have been in the creeks, those that this is their kind of expertise, like Ms. Holthouse. any help you can provide, we would accept, and certainly whatever we draft, we would hope we would have time to submit it back to you so you could all see it, take a, review it, and provide any comments back before we finalized it and went to production.
Yeah, so my hope would be that we all do the same thing. I don't want to just be a one-way thing where I'm throwing out my suggestions and they might get picked up, might not. It seems better to look at everyone else's, and jointly we can make it a better, just a better effort if there's some central repository. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
SharePoint is that central repository,
Okay.
but if you send an email and copy Watershed Erosion, which is how you receive notifications about the meeting, the link to Zoom, everybody else will receive it at the same time. So I'm not forcing people to use SharePoint, but there's a couple of options for us. Thank you.
Just in relationship to the thing, this is great. I'm excited that the video series is doing great. I think it's great work. Is there any reason why we couldn't still in parallel have, like, in 2 weeks or in 10 days or something, a quick half-hour do's and don'ts, like 3-slide PowerPoint promoted on our social media page, and have a Zoom link where we just have Dr. Hammer or somebody talk for those 3 slides and then let people Q&A with him?
We certainly could, and I would also offer Mr. Archeski to sit in as part of that. I can't speak for Dr. Hammer and his schedule or Mr. Archeski, but I'd love to try to do it.
Mr. Archeski or Dr. Hammer, is that something you guys might be interested in? Maybe we could try to arrange?
I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, that would be fine. I think we need to come up with some maybe pre-questions that we already have answers to.
Okay, great. I think that's fantastic. I'll let you guys maybe just talk over that, and maybe we could set a date, and then you guys could, the city could put it on their social media page as a Q&A morning talk about, that issue.
We'll coordinate tomorrow with all the parties and see if we can get a time set that's convenient and have enough time to prepare.
Coffee in the creek.
Coffee in the creek sounds great. Moving along, Dr. Hammer, I think you're next up on our agenda. Do you have anything additional to provide or present?
No, not really. I think you folks are doing a good job. You're being real thorough, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I should let you know that I know some of you were probably frustrated that it took a little bit of time to get that list of reports to you. But it takes a while when you've not been in the creek to get back in it and figure out exactly what's going on and have enough observations to know that the hypotheses I carried in were true, which I think they are. So I feel pretty good about the recommendations I made. So no, I don't have anything to add. I would like to take the opportunity, though. I've been taking notes as I've been listening to this, and right now I've got 6 action items for myself. So maybe this is a good time to review those. And then you can tell me which ones are really important, because right now they all are. I've got the ordinances that I've started to review, and that's the kind of work I can do early in the morning and at night. You want me to visit flood sites, people that have complained, and we want to start that as soon as possible. If it be possible for somebody in the city to prioritize those so I can start with the most important ones, I think that'd be the most effective way to start. And then the word gets out that we're actually doing it. And some of that work can be done when I'm doing some of the other things in Wildwood that need to be done. You wanted a priority of the really important locations on this list of 17. I can do that tonight. That won't take long. I pretty much had done it in my head, but I wanted you folks to see the list before I did that. You want me to walk Bonham, Wild Horse, and Hamilton Carr, and that shouldn't take too much time. And some of that can be done when I'm looking at the flood sites, because a lot of those are going to be on these 3 creeks. So those are things that can be combined, which I surely want to do to save time and resources. You want me to visit the priority sites as soon as possible with Mark Meyer, and we were talking about starting that next week. So Kathy, if you or Joe or somebody in your office could get in touch with Mark and see what his schedule is, I will accommodate my schedule with his. During the last 10, 12 weeks that we've all been at home with the COVID situation, unloaded a lot of other things I was doing. So you folks pretty much have my schedule now for the next few months till we get these things underway and wrapped up. You're my #1 priority. and then the video that we're going to do fairly quickly too. So those are the 6 things I have down. And I'm going to get started on all of them next week.
And with the committee's permission, just so I just ordinances, visiting flood sites, priority of location, game, so that we can understand for our budget going into August, knowing that we only have about 6 weeks left before August starts, that maybe having some insight for where you think we're going to need funding up front for some of the key areas, I think would be important. And then I think the other items I think could be last after that, if you will. And then I think the video should be also in that top 3 priorities.
All right, sir. I'll do it.
Anyone disagree with that? Sorry, Mr. Gunther.
Not a disagreement. Dr. Hammer, when you walk Carr Creek, and I don't know if that includes Hamilton Creek as well, going up into Rockwood Reservation or not, but could you let me know? I can't say I could be available for scheduling, but you never know. So it's possible if I'm not slowing you down that I could join you.
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to do that. Like the company.
Ms. Eames, and then
and the other thing that I had on the list, Dr. Hammer, that could be on the back burner is just a future recommendation for maintenance plans on the worst areas. So how often you want us to repeat data, you know, if we can get a volunteer in every subdivision or every area and that's in their backyard, we can get them going out once a month, every storm event, something like that. So I just want to know, based on the worst areas, what that recommendation is, so we can kind of get that organized simultaneously. I'm just afraid that whatever data we get, you know, 3 months from now, it's going to look very different.
Good idea, and I can do that too when I do the prioritization.
Mr. Rambo.
I just wanted to mention that I am the nominal chair of the ordinance subcommittee, and there's a lot of ordinance work, I think, going on that I don't have a clue about, and I have no control issue whatsoever. If it's getting done, that's great, but I feel as though I should, if not weigh in, at least sort of be in the loop with that. I'm not sure Dr. Hammer was clear on that.
Well, to Dr. Rambo, when Dr. Hammer contacted me and said, what's a priority here, getting out into Cox Creek and some of the other mainline channels of the watersheds or the ordinance review, I took the liberty to say that I think we needed to get those critical locations started first. And Dr. Hammer has the set of ordinances. There's 5, the floodplain regulations, the tree preservation and restoration code, the grading code, the zoning ordinance, and the subdivision and development regulations. So I think he has the universe now, Dr. Rambo, and we can certainly coordinate through you as the leader of the subcommittee.
Sure. There's one component that I feel we're discounting, and that is corrective actions that aren't new construction, but existing subdivisions that never had retention basins because they weren't forced to do so. There's one upstream from me that I swear we have a lot more runoff now that it's grass instead of woods, and I guess we'll just we're planning to address those in the videos. Or is there any other more formal way that we can address some of those things? If we could throw some money at the at some of these corrective actions, it might be cost effective. I don't know that, but I just don't want it to fall off the table.
Dr. Rambo, again, there are experts on the screen beyond myself, and I'm not one. But if we don't address the runoff at the source better than we do, we'll always be chasing our tail downstream.
Yep.
And I would defer to Mr. Archeski and Dr. Hammer. But there's detention basins out there that were built at a standard, and this whole house has said it better than I, that do nothing.
And you're right, Dr. Rambo. If you remove trees and plant grass, you can expect about a 40% increase in runoff in a humid environment.
So those are Dr. Hammer's. We have more left on the agenda, but but those are Dr. Hammer's charges, if you will. And then our charges are going to be, we'll work with, we'll figure out what our HO, see if we can find a way to develop even a Q&A even with them for detention basin, at least identification of their detention basin and probably identification of how they can tell whether or not it's properly functioning. And I'll work with Mr. Archeski and the group to try to see how we can get an email out, at least to the HOA trustees that we're aware of. We've got the videos that are on board that we were hoping to get started with as well. And one thought is we just need to make sure that those are closed captioned for our deaf audience as well. So if we just make sure that that's part of our video series. And then it looks like Ms. Eden's asked which committee is going to be in charge of the creek cleanup in the fall. I'll punt that to the group to see what people think. I don't have any. I can tell you that the Boy Scouts are really interested, and I heard a couple things. There's a weather merit badge, and if we're going to look at 20 or 30 years of precipitation, that could be tied into a weather merit badge, actually. There's opportunities they're really excited about. Cleaning up by itself doesn't get a merit badge, but there are aspects of actually walking the creek that will actually count towards merit badges. And given the fact that our Boy Scouts and our Girl Scouts don't have summer camps to go to, these are their only opportunity to get a lot of these merit badges in mass so they can get to their Eagle Scout or Gold Star.
I know there's a lot of sponsorships that get involved with Operation Clean Stream. Home Depot especially, they supply bags and gloves and things of that sort. So we might want to investigate some of those ideas from the Operation Clean Stream, which is also done in August.
Mr. Archeski, would you mind kind of taking that on? I know you've been integral in Operation Clean Stream along with Mr. Gunther.
Okay.
He saved you, Lauren. I was actually going to recommend, since your passion was to clean the streams, but Mr. Archeski's there for you. Okay.
There's always room for one more.
Okay, well, we have subcommittees, but I think we've talked enough about a lot of these things, unless there's a subcommittee, anything else someone wants to bring up. But I do want to give time for Mr. Gunther to present what he was going to talk about.
Okay.
Kathy, can he have permission to share slides? I think you have something to show. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have some slide images to share with you. If I can share a screen.
I gave you permission. Is it an option at the bottom now to share screen?
Oh yeah, share screen. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, here it is here. And okay, can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This wasn't planned, but the two topics that came up tonight's meeting were Bonham Creek and bridges. And so I wanted to just share this, and others of you may be very, very familiar with what's going on here with the bridge replacement on Old Etherton in Orville, going over Bonham Creek. But this happens to be in an area of Orville with, this wonderful historical architecture that we have here, the Hoffenberg Fix Store from 1867. There's a whole collection of these buildings up and down the road. And this is a view of the old bridge before it was taken out for removal, for replacement. It's my understanding that this bridge will be wider and it will be elevated 4 feet higher than it is currently today. And I'll leave it to your imagination in terms of grades rising up and over and what it's going to do to the neighboring properties. But that's a concern. But I went there yesterday and this is what I saw. And maybe it's not my critical eye, but this seems to be diametrically opposed to what we've all been talking about in terms of rip-wrapping the heck out of our creek systems. And this house over here, the old school building, one time had several trees in the yard and a much more benign site alongside the creek. And today, They have this, and this is striking me more like River de Pere than Wildwood. I'm quite alarmed by what I saw here. This obviously is where the bridge is going to be coming in, and I'm trying to imagine this thing 4 feet higher and what it's going to do for these folks as they, have to look at the side of that, as well as, what it's going to do, in terms of stormwater and so on. But I know this is in progress in terms of construction. Maybe it's going to be planted out. I don't know. But this is the creek as it comes towards the bridge. This is the size of the creek with its natural gravel bed and so on. Just before you get to this new bridge right here, that view I just showed you is off to the left. So I open it up for conversation, clarification, what's going on here. Are we doing something to our own city that we're not advocating as an erosion task force? I hope we wouldn't be doing this to other parts of our creek, but I could be wrong. So I'm just going to open up for group discussion, and you guys can let me know what you think.
I'll comment first that it's heartbreaking, and that I saw a lot of it in Fox Creek, and there's probably potential to recover here, but I'm wondering, is that to code? They're doing everything right as far as they're required to do it? I guess that's a question for Joe's the best one to answer that.
Well, this is being recorded, so I understand about what I'm about to say isn't going to go away. But there has been a history with the Department of Public Works of not following many of our own regulations, not subjecting itself to the review processes we require of our residents, our business owners, and our development community. And for the most part, Dr. Hammer has identified bridge construction practices in the city of Wildwood as deplorable.
Dr. Hammer, what's your initial response?
Oh, you didn't see me go to the bathroom. Yeah, I'm just dumbfounded at this, and especially at the idea that you'd want to raise the bridge 4 feet. You'd have flood water in people's living rooms before they'd overtop the bridge. So it's like I said in all the bridges I addressed in the report, it's overbuilding without regard to thinking about how to engineer this new bridge into the landscape in a way that's sustainable. But before I'd say too much more, I'd want to see what the creek looks like both upstream and down. But I'm really disappointed at the way they've riprapped, at the fact that I don't think they're really paying any attention at all to what's going on around them with the other bridges that have been built. So maybe this is a place I should go look at first thing next week, or maybe even tomorrow or Friday.
That looks exactly like the new Fox Creek Road Bridge near the Veterinary Center, just FYI. It's been there, the bridge has been done a few years, but they took exactly the same liberties with the stream banks.
I don't see any siltation barriers either.
I don't either.
Let me ask a question. I mean, I know I can see there's no plant plugs. There's relatively small rocks that would have been washed out in other creek areas. What would help alleviate this from happening in the future? Is this an ordinance where we specifically write in that these practices are not allowed, so they're not even bid on in the future? Is there a sit-down meeting that needs to happen between our public works staff and Dr. Hammer and Mark for communication and collaboration? Do we want to require that we have the Watershed stamp of approval from the task force before work like this is done in the future? Let's talk practical steps for the future.
I would like to ask, what is the process for a bridge project? I suppose it starts out with architecture, engineering of some sort, in this case, engineering, the design of the bridge. And I don't know, I guess the owner or whoever is initiating or has the financing and is bringing the project on board. And then it seems to me would have to go for permits, reviews, like building projects, you have to go through reviews and all that process. Is there a certain defined process for bridge construction in Wildwood? To prevent this, bridges being built that are like we've been looked at.
Actually, there is a state statute that says any community that has a master plan, comprehensive plan, whatever you may call it, has to submit all of its infrastructure projects to the Planning and Zoning Commission. This one was not.
So is there a penalty then to the council that did it?
I'm sorry. Then couldn't that project, then wouldn't this project be stopped by not following basically not following the regulations of the governing agency or agencies?
I'm not defending the context of what you see on the slide, but many of our bridge replacement projects are federally funded, and federal requirements as administered through the Missouri Department of Transportation or East-West Gateway Council of Governments stipulate certain standards or requirements that obviously those of us on the other side of the issue don't believe are appropriate here in Wildwood. I'm not going to throw the Department of Public Works under the bus. There's a lot of strings tied to funding from the federal government as well as the state government. And they use a one-size-fits-all. Typically what we try to do is take those regulations when they apply to things that the Department of Planning and Parks are doing and make it more workable, more site sensitive, and certainly more environmental friendly. I would argue, what's wrong with a one-lane bridge? If it's not structurally deficient, what's wrong with a one-lane bridge?
And Joe, here's a view of what it was before. Obviously, it's literally water under the bridge now, but this is what we had and what we're trying to envision. And yes, I did hear it's federal money. If it's federal money, it has to be, quote, out of the floodplain. And then it gets wider. And then I heard there's a path on either side besides 2 lanes that are wider, and it's going to be 4 feet higher. And it's like the country character of it is going to be completely different. And I think, we're all trying to preserve the qualities, natural qualities and characteristics of our community so that, it's still someplace we recognize. But it just does seem like just overkill. And I'm sorry that we're at this point, but I think these questions are good ones to raise in the future. What do we do? What are our lessons learned? Do we not accept federal money, and do something? How can we have more control over this? Planning and zoning. Quite frankly, I'm not on architectural review board anymore, but it's almost like an ARB kind of question in some regards about the aesthetics of it all. But it's also it's a Wildwood it's a watershed task committee review, I think, as well as a good suggestion. But what can we do to avoid this in the future? Because this is going to be something that nobody's going to recognize. And quite frankly, it's probably going to speed up the cut through traffic too, which is, we've always talked about traffic calming, and you make it wider and faster, and we're going at cross purposes with the neighborhood concerns. So at any rate, I just thought I should bring this up and, see what we can do to avoid this in the future. Maybe there's mitigating things that we can do to plant these things out going forward here. Given what's going on right here, maybe there's at least an aggressive way to come back and do that bank stabilization with additional planting and try to get dirt and the appropriate plant materials in here to soften it up whatever way we can.
And that was my comment with having Dr. Hammer and our Mark Meyer on retainer to look at some of these projects.
Was that a structurally deficient bridge? Is that the rationale for replacement? Does anyone know that?
I don't know if it was structurally deficient from the standpoint of a worry about collapse, but I know that one-lane bridges typically are identified as in at least here in the city of Wildwood, as needing to be replaced.
Mr. Vunich, in response to Co-Chair Chesky's comment, do we need a formal motion or at least make sure that this is part of our budget going forward to maintain the two gentlemen on retainer for that purpose?
Again, not knowing if they're willing to do that. Mr. Meyer designs bridges as well as part of his company. It might be nice to hear the version from our Department of Public Works as well as a practicing engineer that provides services to municipalities. But I can assure you, back when we replaced the bridge over Cox Creek by Point Clayton, the Point Clayton subdivision, the city, invested thousands and thousands of dollars of bringing in people like Dr. Hammer, Dr. Robert Prager, a gentleman from Colorado, which he is a specialist in these flash flood environments. And we created a template, and it worked until Ameren, Missouri removed all the vegetation under their lines. And that was the template we thought we were going to go forward with. I can tell you what's going to happen to this bridge. There's no gradation of rock. So it's all going downstream once the next big storm comes. And we'll be back out there year after year, putting it back in, trying to basically stabilize the bank and protect the infrastructure, the investment, the bridge. You put the largest in and then you grade it up to the smallest. And this is all just, and it doesn't look big enough to me, but I'm no engineer. I apologize.
So I don't even know how to phrase this, to be honest. I mean, yes, we use federal and state dollars, but I mean, what aren't we doing and what should we be doing so that when we spend taxpayer dollars to quote unquote upgrade a bridge, what should we be doing to make sure that it actually meets the standards and the quality that Wildwood wants? Just because it has federal and state dollars and it doesn't mean we can't go above their standards.
That's correct, ma'am. I think you should view those as minimum standards. And then anything we should do should be above those standards or attempts to mitigate those standards within the confines of what's allowable. Again,
so do you have any idea how we got here?
It's a world driven by engineers. And
Was this a 60-40?
It may be more than that, Rick. I think it might be an 80% federal, 20% local.
Okay.
But I guess what I'm saying is there's no geomorphologist, there's no hydrologist, there's no soil scientist, there's no architect. There's none of that on that team that looks at this bridge replacement and says, how do we do it? There's no multidiscipline component. It's an engineer or engineers being reviewed by engineers. And we have checks and balances in place, but Mr. Gunther lives by a bridge replacement down at Milrose and Route 109.
Yeah.
The riprap that was put there, it's already been moved twice, if not more times. There's exposed bank already. And
right.
It's a bridge that just opened within the last couple of years.
Right.
There is something systemically wrong about how we're doing it. And it's not my place to say, you asked, you got it. I'll regret it tomorrow, but here it is.
Yeah.
Mr. Vunich, can I make a suggestion, consideration at least? Would it be feasible or possible in August or even early September for our committee to have a joint meeting with the architecture committee and P&Z with the department and Dr. Hammer as well, and find ways to bring up topics that are going to need harmonization in the upcoming year. That way we may be able to get all on the same page and identify a strategic plan moving forward, and then identify if we need to allocate resources to address the metrics that we're looking to tackle.
Dr. Remy, that's about the best suggestion I've heard since the incorporation effort. So thank you. And I do everything I do everything I can to make that happen.
And Joe, this was not to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
I thought this was a good example that John brought up.
Yeah, we're just trying to learn and go forward and not damage our environment. We want to make sure we're doing as a city what we're trying to do as a group here too. And you know, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to go row in the same direction. And you know, so whatever we can do to help and avoid this in the future, and whatever we can do to mitigate what's going on here now, as bad as it looks right now, and I know it's under construction, maybe there's things we can do to come back in here and make it better. So anyway, but I appreciate your taking the time to review this with us and you know, give us thoughts.
Actually, thank you for bringing it up. This is helpful.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
John, before you change slides, you know, the other thing that struck me is how close that pole is right up to the edge of the rocks, the one on the far right. So, you know, I don't know if that's, I assume that's Amarin and not just a phone line, but you know, you have to think that
The phone line. Right.
those rocks are going to slide, and then that's an easement that's not even ours. So,
Right.
you know, they're going to want to protect their pole and their infrastructure. So that's another thing is, you know, it's another jurisdiction, another group that's going to be altering the creek bed
Right.
at the same time. And I think we have started to work with MSD. We did have their government relations liaisons. Oh, sorry, I just heard a squirrel. Government relations liaisons come to the meeting. Maybe we need to get on the agenda that we have, you know, Amarin or, you know, AT&T or any of these other companies that have infrastructure poles come and meet with us so that they know that before they make changes, that they would give us the courtesy of coordinating that with us.
Right. Right.
So I would like that to be, you know, an action item is to get them on a creek meeting agenda.
That's a good, brilliant idea. Maybe what we can, no, I'm sorry, maybe what we could do, I think it's a great idea. What about the possibility of also considering some of these other stakeholders that also provides things like you just mentioned, MSD, MoDOT, if Amarin, things, these, or what if when we have this combined meeting in August, we even just have just a brief, invite them as well for parts of that, because ultimately they're going to have a number of different facets that are going to interact with those three boards as well.
Right. I'll echo that. That goes back to Joe. You were saying Amarin, I guess, came in and took out vegetation, and that damaged the creek. We need to have our practices established where we're asking these various utilities and that they're not controlling us, but or at least they can work with us, not say take it or leave it. If we can come in and say best practices, you know, don't do that, go to the don't do this, do this kind of thing, right? And how can we work together so we don't damage this? I was on a webinar this morning. I was actually from Florida, AIA Florida, and it was on wicked water. It was on rising sea levels and stormwater and how they're dealing with it. And believe me, they've got some real issues to deal with there. But they were saying you might spend $1 in infrastructure and raising buildings higher, et cetera, but you save $6 down the road by not having things get damaged. So I think this may be a case where, you know, if we can plan, we're actually being fiscally responsible. If we can plan something that's ecologically sensitive, works with the creek, we'll be saving ourselves money down the road or down the creek, Joe, because you won't be there trying to repair what's getting flushed right past this bank of rocks in the future. So, you know, I like the idea of invest 1 and save 6, you know. And by the way, if I may, one other thing in terms of funding, something they referred to today, it was, there was a landscape architect there, Ann Baker from D Land Studio, and she's also a part of American Flood Coalition. Have any of our experts ever heard of the American Flood Coalition? She was talking about FEMA funding, you know, in terms of trying to get some funds as well. Now again, all that money may be going to Florida, dealing with strengthening, you know, what's coming at them with sea level. But my ears perked up a little bit in terms of our funding efforts if FEMA is a possible source as well. But at any rate, I thought their coalition might be an interesting, group to learn from. And I have Ann Baker's email, and I can try to follow up with her.
I don't have my spreadsheet. I did make a contact with local FEMA.
Okay.
Without looking at it, I'm not sure I don't remember offhand what the response was.
Okay.
I'll look at that.
I'll get you some information, Richard.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm really happy to hear the suggestion of getting Ameren and MSD and all the other partners together at a table, because that was one of the things that I was working on before. And I think it's key which individual we get from each one of those organizations to sit down at the table. Because as you all know, if you develop a personal relationship, when there's limited amount of funds, those that have a good working relationship are more likely to obtain those funds. So I think, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's critical for us to be able to do what we want to do, especially going forward, and then maintaining what we accomplished.
I would like to ask, is there a set of universal codes for building bridge construction, a universal set of building codes that are applicable to various conditions, the size and the general conditions that the bridge is proposed to be built in?
I'm sure the engineers have it, but they don't care about the area around it.
I see.
Mr. Sturman, there's the Federal Highway and Transportation Administration has regulations for federally funded projects on federal roads. There's AASHTO standards, which is a entity, a non-government entity that publishes them. Many use those. The city has its own design criteria, much of which we use for the purposes of road and bridge construction. So there's a lot of standards out there relative to bridge and road construction. Folks, that was like a gut punch.
Joe, I'm sorry.
That just looks, yikes.
Well, let's move forward. Let's look forward. Let's try to, address it going forward.
We've talked about a lot of stuff tonight. It's been a pretty dense meeting. So one thought is, Kathy, maybe tomorrow I'll just email you what I remember that we talked about today, and maybe we'll just circulate an email just to summarize briefly what we all talked about today. I know Ms. Edens has also taken some notes, and I'll get with her as well. And then because we're not having a July meeting, we can maybe send a couple emails during that time frame and firm up some of the things we need to do before August, if possible. I don't have any other additional matters. Is there anything else anybody on the committee wanted to bring up?
Dr. Remy, if we start putting together some content, and if Kathy and I promise that we'd keep the meeting to maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, would you all consider maybe a special meeting sometime in July, just so you could see what we've achieved in terms of the steps and things like that?
Oh, undeniably. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't touch that week that we set aside that no one would have any meetings. So if we picked a different date, I don't have a problem with that if the rest of the committee would be acceptable of that.
Right, and it would just be more of an update. Pardon? I
was just gonna say, it should have clicked with me why there was multiple days open that week when there's never any nights open on the calendar. So.
Hey, that was my motion to make sure that and I didn't even pick up on it.
Well, thank you.
Just make sure it's not a garden cleanup day again.
Well, Mr. Archeski, I told Ms. Gaston that you intentionally scheduled this meeting for that day.
Oh, so I didn't have to pull weeds tonight.
Yeah.
Well, and if Mr. Arteski and Dr. Hammer could get together to figure out when they want to have that, kind of Q&A type thing, I think it'd be great for a show of solidarity if a lot of us can join and listen in.
That would be fine. If you're coming in soon, we can meet visually.
Sounds good. I can be there whenever you want me.
And
Dr.
thanks,
Hammer, you're just so accessible now. We're going to have to really dig up your time.
You already have.
Well, if there's no objections, can I have, is there a motion to potentially adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Made by Ms. Edens, secondary by Ms. McCutcheon, not debatable. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Everybody have a great night. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Long,
folks.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.